Sweet.
Okay, we are on the air and it is 4 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started with the Finance Committee meeting for April 20th, 2023. Mayor Heichel is out of town, so he asked me to chair in his place. I don't know if other council members will be showing up, hopefully, but we're here, so. We got 3 items on the agenda today, and we'll go ahead and get started with the first item, which is a discussion regarding the creating of a transit and parking authority. Something that's definitely been around, talked about for a number of years for sure. So
Transit and parking, parking and transit, however we end up naming this. Okay, so if you don't mind, I'll get started. Just to give you a little bit of background, not a bunch. I said earlier this has been going on since 2014. Initially, when the Economic Development Advisory Board was appointed back then, they were given a task list by council of things to kind of tackle first. And one of those things included financing mechanisms for campus corner and downtown parking solutions. If you can recall, back then, we were starting the center city visioning process. We were envisioning all this high density coming in, and we knew we would have parking needs. We had done a parking study in 2003. EDAB petitioned council to please update that parking study, and so in 2015, 2016, we went through that process with the Jacobs Engineering, who had done the 2003 study, but become Carter Burgess somewhere in the meantime. And so they came in and worked on that study, and then the county participated, and then the county did their own study, and we participated in that with Kimley Horn. So a lot of studying going on about parking. Who knew it could be so exciting? So at that time, we explored a multi-jurisdictional parking authority to implement these plans. The EDAB gave unanimous support. We wanted to plan for the future and manage what we had, of course, but it just never came to fruition. We've never done a joint trust with another entity like that before, and so there was some discomfort, I think, in doing that. But I think by and large, we understood there were benefits to it as well. So it's coming back to you because now, in addition to parking, we also have transit, which has to be accounted for separately anyway because of grants and sales tax funding. So we've talked about it recently in EDAB, and there's still support for that, and we wanted to bring it back in just a little different format. But I wanted to talk a little bit about public trust first. So why do a public trust? Why is that better than it just being part of the city? Well, public trusts exist as separate legal entities. They're completely separate from municipal beneficiaries. In the same way, we are not liable for activities of the hospital, one of our other public trusts. We would not be liable for parking and transit activities, and parking and transit in an authority would not be liable for city activities. They exist for the public benefit, of course, and act on behalf and in furtherance of public functions. They can issue debt, commit to long-term financial obligations, which is really beneficial when we're doing these annual contracts with Embark. It would be great to be able to do a 5-year contract, but because we're doing those contracts as a city, we're subject to the constitutional debt limitation and we can't go beyond 1 year. And then sale of real or personal property, eminent domain, a lot of the same powers the city has, and ends up operating very similarly, as you all know. So public trusts operate under the authority of a board of trustees, which in most of our trusts is council, but a similar setup, all the same. It creates a fiduciary relationship. You'll know Anthony always addresses you as trustees of the such and such authority when you're taking that action, because he really wants you to understand that is a separate action from the city. The trustees hold the title to the property, the trust estate or trust property, and act as authorized for the benefit of the beneficiary, which would be the city. Annual financial reports are done, annual audits are done, competitive bidding still has to be followed, and then we have to follow the Open Records Act and Open Meetings Act, so there's no getting out of those kind of requirements. This is just as transparent and similar to the city in operation. Before it can be approved, you have to have, before debt can be approved, you have to have 2/3 approval of the governing body of the beneficiary. It's pretty easy when it councils the trustees, but in the case of the hospital, they might come up, as they did in recent years, with a debt issuance they want to carry forward. They had to come to the city as a beneficiary and get 2/3 approval of that debt. And that's because of this state law requirement. So to create a public trust, council adopts a resolution that both approves the trust indenture and accepts a beneficial interest in the trust. That also requires 2/3 approval of the governing body. And then we have to record the documents with the county, the Secretary of State, and then a newer requirement is to file notice of creation with the state auditor, so they know that they should expect financial audits from us. As you all know, we use trust quite a bit for the golf course, sanitation, any revenue bonds we issue. We do that using the Norman Municipal Authority. Norman Utility Authority, of course, is water and sewer projects. The hospital, we have the TIF Authority, and then we have the never been used, but maybe one day, Economic Development Authority. And that was created around the same time as EDAB and the beginning of these parking discussions. Other cities use trust similarly. I'll just talk about two. Oklahoma City, everyone's pretty familiar, I think, with COTPA. That's the Central Oklahoma Transportation and Parking Authority. It was created back in 1966, and that is bus service, parking, all rolled into one. And the purpose there in the trust indenture was to plan, develop, build, and operate a balanced parking and transportation system for the region. On their board of trustees, Oklahoma City is pretty different from us. I don't know that they have a trust where it's council members only serving as trustees. Usually it's a mix. Here they had the mayor, the city manager, and the finance director, and then 5 trustees appointed by the mayor and approved by council, requiring that one live outside of OKC because of that regional aspect of the trust. The administrator of COTPA is appointed by the city manager, but approved by the trustees. In Tulsa, they created their parking authority in 1963. Similar purpose, but more focused on parking and not transit. They have 5 trustees. One is the mayor or his designee, and then 4 are mayoral appointees with council's approval. And they operate all of Tulsa's off-street parking, garages, and lots, but the city still manages the parking meters. So what's proposed here is a similar broad purpose to cover parking and transit. You can see here it's planning the systems, the facilities, and administering the funds, acquiring the property they need to do that function. It would be similar to most other Norman trusts, so we have it set up right now. Council's the trustees, city manager is the general manager of the trust, the city would be the sole beneficiary, and as with NUA or NMA, we follow the same policies for purchasing, bidding, all of that, that are set forth in our code for our public trusts as well. I wanted to talk a little bit about possible revenues and expenses. We have the public transit sales tax that is dedicated to transit, and so that cannot be mixed to cover parking. Parking could be used to cover transit, but I don't think there's that much parking money. You'll see in your trust indenture, I added a paragraph because I wanted to make really clear that the trust authority would be able to expend those dedicated sales tax revenues because it is a city dedicated sales tax. I've talked to bond counsel about it. It's Article 4, Section 5 of the trust. Just committing the trust to spend those revenues in accordance with the sales tax ordinance to make sure we're doing things right there. Other revenues could be grants. We get a lot of grants for transit, for buses, for just general operations from the FTA. So that could all go into the till. And then if you look at our parking meter revenue, we're projecting we'll have about $220,000 in FY24. And then parking enforcement revenue, I was able to talk to Rhonda Guerrero, and she gave me the numbers from FYE 2022. We collected about $235,000 in parking enforcement revenue. So that could all possibly go in to the trust as part of the revenues for operations. It does, of course, have a pretty good impact to the general fund, a pretty good sized impact for such a small amount of revenue. It's still, $500,000 almost.
So currently, that revenue is going into the general fund, and I know we can spend it on anything we want to
Right.
at that point. are we not spending all of that on parking or parking enforcement issues?
We're spending that and then some, I think. So possible expenses kind of covers that.
Because I would definitely expect if, yes, it is a hit to the general fund, but we should probably be spending that money on that anyway, right?
Transfer the revenue and the expenditure over to an authority, then you're.
Like we're not making revenue
negative
off
impact.
parking tickets and then using that to pay for the park, or
Right.
we could,
No,
but
we spend far more on the equipment, the staff,
Than we
those
bring
kind
in.
of things than we bring in. So transit still, those expenses would be tied to those funding sources, the FTA grants and this dedicated sales tax, and those are designed to cover the expenses of the staff, internal operations, our contract with Embark, equipment purchases, and of course, purchase and renovation of real property, although I think over time they have gotten some contributions from the general fund. The goal is for those expenses to be covered by that sales tax. And you could still make contributions from the general fund to the trust, just not the other way, generally.
the general fund wouldn't be really losing any money if we put.
Right.
Yeah.
Parking meters, equipment maintenance, we think this is gonna cost about $46,000 next year. And then parking enforcement staff, salaries and benefits, not their cars, not their fuel, is about $304,000 in FYE '24. So we're exceeding what we're bringing in with some of these costs, but
Councilor
that's part of it.
How many staff is that?
I believe there's
3 full-time and 1 part-time, I think.
I think it's 4.5.
4 in part, yeah, they just filled a 4th one.
That's not including like the officer, the actual officer that's over that.
No, not the police officer, no, it's
Okay.
just the parking.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so with that, we're just looking to see what you all want us to do. If we're ready to move this forward, we would finalize this trust indenture, bring it forward with the resolution accepting creating the trust and then accepting the beneficial interest in it, and then would go through the filing process with the Secretary of State.
As the RTA conversation continues to develop and sounds like advances towards a 2024 question to the voters, this opportunity to support park and ride lots at our 4 identified station stops in Norman, the timing may be
Yeah.
appropriate.
Okay. Thoughts?
Nothing.
Do you have something to say?
That's normal though.
So really, this transition would be taking some potential liability off the city government
Yeah, I can
by
tell
having an
you.
authority,
Yeah.
just like our other authorities.
Right. Where it's really difficult for us is in our Embark contract.
5 years.
The 5-year thing, a longer term contract would be helpful. We argue over insurance and things like that. And some of that would be resolved with the creation of a trust.
Okay. Councilmember Lynn? Yeah.
And my bad if you covered this. My apologies for being late. What happens to our employees that are currently employed if it goes to that trust? How does that work?
It would be like your NUA employees, your utility employees that are city employees, but they're covered by the revenues in the utility authority funds. So nothing would change from the employee perspective. It's really just creating a different legal entity for operations.
But isn't it, I apologize again, isn't this like with a group? Is this separate? Because that's what we've talked about before, like doing it with the Oklahoma.
Oh, no, this would just be us
My
doing
fault
it.
for
You know,
coming in
it's a
late.
lot like utilities
Okay.
authority or municipal authority where it's our
Okay.
trust, you guys are the
Okay.
trustees. And so from the employee perspective, I don't think it looks any different, but it's going to be
So-
mostly in Anthony's office where.
That's
where
my
it's-
bad for misunderstanding what because hadn't we talked about that before where we're trying to do like a regional when then the parking would go to that? That's what I was confused about.
Yeah,
so.
and that is a little part you missed, just the background where we talked about with the county about doing a multi-jurisdictional parking authority. We've had some preliminary conversations with COTPA, but we've come back to this model because
Okay.
there's not really a lot of interest in.
My apologies again
Parties.
for missing that.
Oh, you're good.
And it does seem like in this formation that it keeps us in line with OKC in an RTA environment, and I don't know if Edmond has one yet. They just pay cash for everything. So
No,
they
I don't
probably
think so.
need it.
have a
That will
different
be the
bus service,
three
too.
agencies. That's true. They do have a different bus connection, but yeah, not to say that won't all
They
transform.
have a really
at some
interesting
point.
bus connection because I think they contract with McDonnell Douglas.
Yes.
But then they contract with Embark. Is that right?
No, they just contract with a third party, private third party. so,
Okay.
yeah.
So from a council standpoint, our oversight doesn't change because we would, in this
You'd be
setup,
the
we would be the
trustees.
trustees
Mhm.
anyway. So we would still have the same oversight and final say in what goes on.
Correct.
I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I think so too, especially with the transit contract. That makes sense to me.
And while the revenues for parking right now don't necessarily cover the expenses, if we do get to a place and we want to look at things like parking garages, we've talked about that before. This authority could handle that separate from the city, obviously under your guidance as well. Yeah, and then we're just also following up with our plans. I want to mention that in the plans that Catherine mentioned, the parking ones especially, they talk about that parking authority. So we wanted to bring it back to council for that.
I have a really interesting, I'm being facetious, white paper on parking authorities if anyone wants it.
Good times.
It's
good
solid
times.
50 plus pages.
Riveting.
Super riveting, but I'm happy to provide that if you guys want it.
Okay.
And I knew I was forgetting something. So we obviously want it to be self-sufficient, but similar to OKC, City Council pays the public trust to expand bus service through Embark. So if there was expansion routes or additional service that council wanted to consider, and the FTA grants and the sales tax wasn't covering it, just like it does right now, the only other option would be to consider a subsidy. So I just wanted to mention that. If the annual grant and the sales tax aren't covering those expansions, then we'd have to consider some other funding source again.
Councilor Grant?
Speaking of that, I was thinking about that microtransit.
Mm-hmm.
And does OKC have something similar? Are we the only ones trying it out in Oklahoma?
They're looking at it. Tulsa is looking at it as well. They may have implemented it and are monitoring it right now, but I believe Maps 4 has a little bit of money for a microtransit service.
So, and if we adopt this model, that all goes under that Parking and Transit Authority.
And I think it's worth mentioning too, Embark, given their broad trust, they manage the ferry boat system. I don't know if anybody realizes that they get FTA ferry grants for the Oklahoma River cruise system. We don't have that opportunity down here, but just other things that might be considered. Bike share, they manage the Spokies bike share system in downtown. Similar to my group, they oversee the scooters. That's just contract and overseeing the vendor, but I assume continue to do that, overseeing that contract. So there are other things that we could consider in the future, maybe that this authority could oversee. Probably not ferry boats, though.
First, we got to build a river.
Right.
Then.
That's what
I think we're
OKC
building
I
them.
didn't know what they had on the river was considered a ferry boat.
Yep.
Okay.
When I first ran for city council, someone was spreading a rumor that my main project was to build a Bricktown canal connecting campus with Main Street. It's like, well, that sounds like it might be cool, but I
Was that in reference
never
to
thought about that, actually.
Stormwater issues or?
Yeah. We wanted to emulate Bricktown.
You know, talk
Norman.
lemons to lemonade.
Yeah, so.
Wow. Water's got-
Okay, well, it seems like there's no objection from this committee to move it forward to.
We'll work on bringing that forward to the full council and getting it on your agenda.
Perfect. Thanks, Catherine. Okay, item number 2 is a discussion regarding the FYE 2024 City of Norman budget.
Going to pass around just some informational things related to our budget discussions that we've had so far. What we're looking at first here is the vehicle replacement list. We had a lot of questions about that on Tuesday night. So what you see here on the first 3 or 4 pages is the entire critical replacement list. And remember that this is the critical replacement list. These are the vehicles that the Fleet Management Division says basically are more efficiently replaced than maintained. And as you see, that list is about $10 million. You'll recall also that our fleet study said that we should be spending about $6 million annually on fleet replacement. Then what you see on the first page where that red line is where we would be if we only allocated the $2 million per year that we have historically been allocating for fleet replacement. So we get down to about number 20 on a critical list of 128. So obviously that has been, inadequate. I would also point out, under that column that says capital, that's where you see the individual costs for some of these pieces of equipment. So again, we've talked about the $82,000 to replace a police car now. But on number 3 there, you see that it's $500,000 to replace a street sweeper. It's $144,000, I believe, a John Deere. I believe that's a lawnmower. Okay, so again, these are high dollar pieces of equipment. You see on number 16, a tandem dump truck is $300,000. So we don't get very far down the list, the critical list for the way that we have been historically doing things. So on the last page there is what we're proposing in the city manager's budget to do this year. The vehicles that you see, and again, these are all recommended for replacement in the city manager's proposed budget. What you see highlighted in yellow are the vehicles that are being replaced out of the seizures fund, that's $1.4 million. And highlighted in, pink, is the $2.2 million that the capital sales tax is funding. And then in the sort of sky blue is the $3.2 million of supplemental funds that is proposed to come from the general fund. And again, the two biggest things there are number 36 and number 37, $830,000 fire pumper trucks. Again, we're not getting that far down the list, but we're doing a whole lot better, getting down to number 46. This is benefiting every department and every function of the city because we are getting further down the list. And again, I hope that this responds to the question that we got the other night. The next thing I'm going to pass around, Councilmember Schuler asked about how many people were requested totally. And I will say that Kim was exactly right when she said 75. But you see the ones that were approved and the ones that were denied. You also see the sort of a ranking process that we go through.
Sorry.
Did everybody get one?
Yes.
And I think we did talk about those positions that were, at least in the general fund, recommended to be funded, but you see those ranked highly at the top there. On the second page, you see those two communication officer positions in the public safety sales tax fund, and then there's 3 recycling positions in the sanitation fund. So that's it. And one thing that I would point out is just on that second page there, 4.67 average ranking is the 15 firefighters that it would take to staff an additional fire station 10. So that would be about $1.3 million for that additional staffing.
So, okay. We've got So business systems analyst for IT is an approved position, but IT security technician was denied.
Yes.
Now, just off the first glance, the security technician would sound like a more important position.
We did add a security technician, I don't know if that's the exact title, but a cybersecurity person in last year's budget. And again, there's justification for all of
Sure,
these positions.
yeah.
But when you're prioritizing them, each department is giving their own justifications for the positions before they're ranked by the individual departments and they're finally recommended or not by the city manager. But I think that the determination was that there was more adequate staffing in the cybersecurity area and in the business systems area within the IT function.
Okay. And so like with the communications officers, 2 of them, I know it's PSST funds, but we can't hire them till the facility is open.
The idea is to start the hiring process early in next fiscal year. It'll take several months to get them on board. And then by the time that they are on board and start training, we'll be getting really close to having that facility up and running.
Okay.
We're incurring enough overtime where if they were on board tomorrow, we could still fill in blanks, keep dispatch full, and just reduce the amount of overtime, so.
Yeah, well, I think this is a good informative list. There's several victim advocate for the police department, code compliance officers, infrastructure maintenance. Those all seem like things we got to have
They're
for the
all
city to run, right? But yeah, it's hard to
And as we
budget-wise.
think about our SEC counterparts, and man, how do they have 500 more employees than we do, and they're a smaller city? If those revenues materialize the way we hope, this is how we go about staffing up, along with the number of bodies required just to support
So we would need
those crowds.
if we were to fill all of these requests, it would take $7.7 million
Correct.
a year.
Per year.
Well,
It's like being shovel-ready on your personnel needs, though, so.
and on this vehicle list, so above the red line is like you said, the critical ones. But
They're
this,
all critical.
Right,
Remember,
right,
the
right, right.
$10 million
These are the
is
most.
the critical list.
But this is what we can do
But these
with
are the
the.
highest ranked
Okay.
by the
Yeah,
fleet
they're
division.
ranked
But
from
this
worst to
list
best.
includes the vehicles that will be replaced in here.
Yes.
The last page is a summary of what's actually recommended.
That's the total. Okay, gotcha.
Finally, related to the budget, I'm just going to talk briefly about the amendments that we have heard so far. We will need to fill in the amortization schedules for the general obligation bonds that were just approved by council. If the room tax rate increase is approved, then we would come back with an amendment for revenues and additional programming from the Arts Council and from Visit Norman. That's a big if, obviously. We have information from the water and wastewater reclamation divisions that there is a $50,000 annual administration fee for the solar panel electricity program that we'll need to work in. You'll see an amendment for that. And then I believe it was Councilmember Grant that proposed a capital project for Reed Avenue, installing curb and gutter. The engineering department estimates that to be about $145,000.
Is that just for the design part or for the
No, I
total?
think that's the construction, design and construction. And recall that where we're adding capital projects, we need to find a place to pay for them. So I
How
think
much was that again? When?
145,000 I can give you. And again, this is just a preliminary list. We know it will be added to. But where we propose to take that from is from the existing concrete maintenance and asphalt maintenance programs that are allocated in the budget already. So effectively, that's what those programs will be used for in this coming fiscal year,
I see.
if we did that project. Yeah, I'll pass these around. I didn't think anybody.
Thanks.
I guess if I have more questions about the design and everything, I'll just talk to them about that. When did they come up with this figure?
Last week or two, you wanna-
I can speak to that if you'd like.
Oh, didn't see, sorry.
Joe is
So
our
for
streets.
yeah, Josephville Streets Program Manager. So for Reed Avenue, what we did was a preliminary estimate, kind of as conservative as we can be. I know we've talked about it a little bit, that there are a lot of unknowns with that project and what it could look like. And then we added a roughly $25,000 assumption for the cost of engineering. It's not a full design set, like a full roadway set. You're gonna have a lot more survey-based information is really what we need.
Could we get stuck in a position where that actually isn't the amount?
Absolutely. I mean, all we've had is the couple of weeks that we've been talking about this. So there's very much the possibility that we run into unknowns, utility conflicts. I mean, there could be more needed. We could find out it's a really simple fix.
Okay.
I wish I had a better answer
Okay.
for you, but this is our assumption based off of our experience in the past.
And in the events that is actually not enough to cover it and do it correctly, what are we doing? Is that an Anthony question?
If we gotta go back and find a couple extra dollars,
If it were more than 145,000, yeah, we'd look for it in other allocations, so.
How much is currently allocated in that concrete pavement maintenance? I don't have my book on me.
Yeah, I don't have,
Okay. Does anybody?
I know where the slide is, but I don't have anything.
Okay. I can-
375,000
I was gonna
for the total concrete pavement maintenance program, I believe,
Okay.
ballpark.
So we're hitting
And I think it's something similar to that for asphalt.
40% of that budget already.
Yeah,
If we,
taking 60-some thousand from that for the start here, what we discussed yesterday, so I just want to make sure. Yep.
Okay. Right.
do we have do we have a list of what is going to be done with that maintenance fund? Already?
I think
So, like,
usually,
would we have a list of projects that we would have to not do?
Yes.
Can we get a list of that before we say yes? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm curious too. And also,
Like,
I
what would we
thought
be giving up?
from our discussions about the budget that when you're running a surplus, like you do one-time projects.
yes, ma'am.
So
Yeah,
this
this
would
is,
fall into that, correct?
it could, if you wanted to supplement the capital fund out of the general fund. The negative that we're talking about is in the capital fund. It's in the capital sales tax is not adequate to fund the capital projects that you already have on the boards. But yes, it would certainly be legal if you wanted to supplement the capital fund out of the general fund.
Or another thought would be do the design this year and then figure out what is actually needed next year.
Could do
Yep.
that.
always a possibility. Lots of
That would be the
scenarios.
fiscally prudent thing
Right.
to do, I think.
Yeah.
So the projects right now that we were looking at on the list of those maintenance projects we would delete or we would remove from next year's program to be able to fund the Reed Street would be in the Floyd addition, Hoover Street from Chautauqua to Maple. That would be a concrete panel replacement. So that street has already been identified in the past to be put on the maintenance list. And then also in Ward 5, 144th Avenue Northeast, from Franklin to the north end of that, it's a dead-end road. We'd be taking money out of that one also, so we'll be able to do the full reach of that project, which was basically an overlay project.
It's a matter of priorities.
Okay, some thoughts about how that could get funded.
So again, if you have other suggested or prioritized projects that you'd like us to cost out for budget amendments and that sort of thing, as we move forward in the process, we'll be glad to do that. And again, those prioritization discussions are totally up to you all, just very similar to what you just did.
Yep, no wrong answer, just whatever you feel is the best combination of projects to advance, that's what we'll move on.
Well, I guess I can just say I'm kind of leaning towards doing the study and maybe not taking it from those other projects.
When you say the study, you mean the design work?
Design.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think because we did have a discussion about that street and how it drains and all, that it would probably be wiser to do that.
And not to say if you chose to fund it out of, general fund balance, it's a thing you could do mid-year. They could bring you the design and, oh my gosh, look what we found, or it could be a happy story, it could be a scary story, but it's not a decision that you're stuck with for a full 12 months. It's a thing that could be brought back and discussed with council at any point in the future when that design at least is an opportunity for discovery. See if there are unknowns that present themselves.
Yeah. That would work. Because I'd hate to delete those two projects too. I know Hoover between Chautauqua and Maple is in pretty rough shape. I'm interested though, since OU is closing permanently First Street, where Hoover would continue going east for the new dorms. So it's Hoover as a city street, but then it becomes West First Street between Maple and Asp. And they're closing that permanently, I've seen, so.
Is this the street that runs like north of the towers?
Yes, yeah, between
Between
the
the
volleyball
towers
court.
and K?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
So that'll just be all pedestrian.
They're building
only,
the new building's gonna be right
right in the middle. Of
right through it, yeah, so.
Wow. So that'll be interesting for a student move in and move out.
So the towers are 12 stories tall, so the new ones are only 5, so they are much more spread out than the towers, so maybe it's more efficient, I guess, but we'll see. But it is in pretty rough shape, especially at those two intersections at Elm and College. But yeah, I think it would be a good idea to find out what it would take and then see where we're at.
Well, you got some good insight because I hadn't heard about that proposed street closure, but yeah, don't doubt
It's already on the map.
the footprint.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the most popular volleyball court in all of Norman is gone. So, okay, so
We will proceed, assuming we'll advance the design and then bring that design back to council when it's ready for further discussion.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so speaking of the general fund, what is the current health or balance?
Again, the general fund balance is very healthy. We're projecting at year end total general fund balance.
Do we know what the current today balance?
No, again, we really only calculate actual fund balance at fiscal year end, but the projection shouldn't be that far off.
And we do still have a healthy surplus.
Yes, sir.
I guess I should phrase that.
We're projecting a total fund balance of about $17.9 million and about $15 million of surplus above the mandate.
Oh. Okay.
If that trend holds for the lion's share of next fiscal, our ability to feel much more comfortable in future staffing requests.
Although a few years ago it
Goes
was
way
like,
up.
well, I don't know if the capital fund ever had that much of a surplus, but it was, capital fund is very healthy, general fund is projected deficit.
And we're just talking
6 years
ago.
works, they're just so efficient.
when we get out 3 to 4 years, we're starting to have current year negatives again. So net difference, we're drawing down fund balance to pay for what we're doing.
Right. It'd be nice to be able to, yeah. So, okay. Rainy day fund, public safety sales tax. You mentioned isn't projected to need a subsidy this year. Room tax, Westwood fund, water fund. We know about that one. Okay, well. Okay. All right. Okay.
Revenue and expenditure reports.
That was kind of it.
Yep.
Okay, so item number 3 is a discussion regarding monthly revenue and expenditure reports.
And again, I think Councilmember Holman kind of touched on everything I was going to touch on, other than, we had a pretty good April, which is reflecting sales during February. And we got, 2 more months in the fiscal year, but I hope the trends will hold and we won't have any big negatives. And if we don't have any big negatives, then we'll close the year in a fairly healthy state.
We did spend a lot of time and attention last night on the news, watching for potential storm impacts, and feel like we dodged the impact of a couple of big strong storm cells. Very little damage reported in Norman. A couple of street signal lights were out for a while. Power was restored relatively quickly. But April and May are usually the heavy months for storm impacts. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. We are not in the line of sight of any of the storm traffic. And we know this upcoming weekend we've got 2 NFL greats and Heisman Trophy winners that'll be here in Norman. Hopefully they'll pack the Palace for a spring game, spend some money, and keep our sales tax revenue.
I will be very interested to see what happens next weekend.
Yeah, we're asking Sarah Kaplan to use her software and give us head counts of how many bodies come to both spring game activities and then the following weekend's music. We're going to drown in music in Norman on the 29th, but how many of those people are coming in from out of town based on that cell phone data? We'll be able to report back to council what those impacts look like.
Expect a lot.
Yep.
They've already sold, they're free, but sold out the tickets to that concert, so 86,000 of them. Someone, I think, mentioned, they commented, well, it'll be all OU students and they'll just walk over there. And I was like, well, there's only 25,000 students on campus.
Yeah,
I don't think they're all going.
Somebody's coming from out of town.
No, there's whole churches coming from
Oh,
Tulsa
yeah.
and
They're from
Yeah,
all over
yeah.
the whole region, I think. Yeah, Councilmember Grant.
When would we hear about sales tax impacts of our events? Like, I was hearing Medieval Fair was really great, but like, how much?
Yeah,
do
now
they
remember
need?
that, yes, it's really the crowd size that you're looking at, because sales tax as a proxy for the success is measured monthly. So you really can't say, how did we do this weekend? It's just how to, you're comparing this month this year to that month last year. But as far as the success of Medieval Fair or Norman Music Festival, you're really looking at the crowd size and the weather. And you're tracking the individual merchants that only permitted for that event. How did they do? That sort of thing. But it's really hard to think of the city sales tax as it relates to that event or even a football game, because it's just one day. It's out of a month.
Could we, is there analysis, and this is Sarah Kaplan's newer tools to track, cell phone movement, to try to correlate when we get hotel bed tax deposits to us in the report. I'm sure they have it all detailed out. I don't know if we've ever delved into it to say that weekend, you could see hotel rooms activities spike. And I'm assuming home game, we see trends like that over the weekend, 2-night minimum, and you can see the bump for those 6 or 7 home games. So we'll attempt some analysis on spring game this weekend, and then music festival and the concert next weekend, and try to overlay some of the cell phone data in the hotel bed tax
I was
collection.
gonna say, I think those entities might track that too. From what I understand, Medieval Fair is pretty tight with like tracking their vendors, making sure sales tax is collected and reported. So they might have that info, specific events.
Straight
not
to the
all-
horse's mouth then. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
Sure,
we
Sherry
can track the
Jackson's
individual
also
vendors,
checked.
but again,
Yeah.
as it relates to the total city sales tax, it's dropped in the bucket. That's, that is a proxy for how that event did. But as it relates to the overall city sales tax, it doesn't move the needle that much.
Oh,
Because other days that month could have had less than
Yeah,
usual,
It's
perhaps.
3 days out of 30, so.
So wait, remind me again, the sales tax is delayed by
months.
2 months? Okay, that's what I thought.
It's
So
up to
April
40
is,
days really.
So in
but yeah,
June, we'll see what April did.
but you can still see the
If you
spikes
bought a
in other
loaf of bread
ways.
on April the 1st, we see the sales tax on June the 10th.
right, okay, so like roughly 2 months. Different. Okay,
But also if you brought it on April the 30th,
30th.
we see it on May the 10th.
yeah, got it.
Well, I noticed that several months this year, we've lagged pretty far behind other cities in the percent growth.
And that turned around. this
Considering
most
that last year
recently.
we were ahead of all of them every month, though. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, I did notice for this past April reporting that we were the highest of all the comparables at 6.82, and Oklahoma City just behind us at 6.2. So
and that is, when you look at it compared to metro cities or Oklahoma cities in general, I thought long and hard about what does it mean about spending patterns and how much of it is influenced by, student activities versus, what we hope are relatively stable payrolls happening in Norman. And there are probably 1,000 different, theories about what
Yeah.
could have caused any of them. But your guess would be as good as ours.
yeah, last
so.
last month or for March, more had 16.88%, and this month 3.9%.
So I do have another
So
question.
yeah,
about
Councilman
that.
Grant.
So what about like use tax? I did read the beginning of the budget book where it talked about maybe being better at collecting that. Are we still finding that we're losing?
We are still losing. We're doing better. And when I say we, I don't mean just Norman. I mean
Cities in general,
In
yeah.
general. But the Wayfair case had that loophole in it about if a business sells less than $100,000 in a year in this state, then they don't have to collect and remit the use tax, and that's what we need to close that loophole because there's a lot of businesses that are falling under that.
Online, right?
Yeah. And if you were individually, it may not add up to much, but if there are thousands of businesses selling, $50,000 worth of hats and scarves, altogether, that would be enough to move the needle. But none of them are reporting.
I remember years ago when we were talking about internet sales tax and we were seeing a decline in local sales tax. Anthony talked about how that the decline in brick and mortar business you could view as millions of dollars, and the collection of online is in the hundreds of thousands at the time. And so it was not nearly like losing a brick and mortar and picking up an online retail is not even close to the same when it comes to revenue. So.
Boy, COVID really changed that, though, pretty dramatically. It weaned people onto that online shopping for groceries and everything else. And, overall, net, it looks like it winds up being good for us. It's probably good for a lot of communities that don't really have a big brick and mortar sales tax generator. If you've got a grocery store or a fast food restaurant or if a Dollar General is your big sales tax generator, probably really seeing the benefits of that online shopping.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments, questions?
I was just saying, not to mention that if you purchase online from a Moore business and have it delivered to your home, we get use tax in Norman. So if there's a business in Moore that is not in Norman and it delivers,
If there's a national chain in Moore that we don't have in Norman or anywhere else in the South Metro, and you shop there.
Yeah.
Have it delivered to
Have
Norman.
it delivered.
It's good for the environment, it's good for our sales tax.
Okay, if there's no final comments or questions about the budget stuff, then I think we're adjourned.
You
Thank
run
you.
a fine meeting.